in the workforce, and 4 or 5 Gen Zers are bringing a parent to their job interview.
That was crazy. 4 of 5.
Yeah. Marcus, as you think about the legal implications of people bringing parents into these kinds of conversations, like this is sort of a weird topic, but
it's really weird. But I mean,
welcome to Practice Project. If you're a CEO, senior leader, or board member navigating the fast evolving world of business, you have found your hub of actionable insight and no-nonsense discussion.
Some interesting stats that relate to Gen Z. 72% of high school students in the United States want to become entrepreneurs, that's crazy. Yeah. And Gen Z now outnumbers boomers in the workforce, and 4 or 5 Gen Zers are bringing a parent to their job interview.
That was crazy. 4 of 5.
Yeah. I have not, any of the organizations I've done work with or been a part of, never saw that happen.
I never have either.
A woman I was working with, she had recently taken over a new group in her company, and a young woman came in for her first one-on-one meeting with an an Apple EarPod in her ear. So that she's sitting there, they're talking, they have a conversation, and then all of a sudden she's like, hold on a second, can I just ask you, like, why do you have an AirPod in your ear? And the young woman's response was, it's just my mom. I bring her everywhere I go. And she's like, wait, your mother is like live in your ear right now? And she said, yes. And she's like, we're going to pause here and let's regroup later. Because she had to compose herself. Like, she wanted to respond appropriately, but I was like, wow, like that would never have been something I would ever have thought of doing. So let alone coming to a job interview, which I haven't seen, but to bring them into your live meetings. Anyway.
If I knew it was an option, I literally would have been like.
Yeah, it's sort of, what is this? What was the show? Man, we could phone a friend.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Yeah. Is this a phone a friend? Marcus, as you think about the legal implications of people bringing parents into these kinds of conversations, like this is sort of a weird topic, but
it's really weird. But I mean, my mind first goes to like privacy, confidentiality. I mean, what if it wasn't her mom? What if it was her attorney? What if it was, prospective employer? Just things that are said. Also, there are state laws depending on where you are on like, can you record a conversation or can you not? And although it's not recording, maybe the mom's recording it, or just the idea that like we're having a conversation and I'm talking to you, but I don't know that there's someone else patched in or that you're recording it. So yeah, that's problematic. And I mean, from a legal standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint too, I don't know. It just, you're not always going to have your mom with you, and we're training you, like we're relying on you to do the job. That's why we're paying you. We're not paying you and your mom.
Yeah. Well, for Valerie, like if people are bringing their parents into these conversations, do we have to start paying them too? Like, what does that do to our labor cost? Crazy to think about. Another thing that I found interesting was some research that was done around the age at which we give people authority and the age at which people are reaching maturity. And the age at which we're giving people authority tends to be on the decrease. And if you think about younger organizations, we've got this swell of younger people coming into the workforce. We've got flatter organizations. If you're in the startup world, certainly that's obvious and clearly the case. Some of the research seems to indicate that the age of maturity is increasing. So the phrase was 26 is the new 18. So people are 8 years later in sort of reaching that maturity stage than they have been historically. And what does that mean if we're giving younger people more authority with less maturity? And how do we think about being aware of that and then B, taking action to mitigate risks or challenges with that?
I actually think this would be an interesting question for you in your seat. Like, I know, I would love to hear what you, when
turn the tables on Barry.
When I read that, I was like, I would love to hear what Barry would say about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a reality, but the generational tendencies of Gen Z, which are directly correlated to the parenting style of those households they grew up in, which tended to be a little bit more protective, a little bit more of helicopter parenting. And so you're delaying that maturity of people coming into their own sort of sense of self as an adult. And I would suspect that if you looked at this trend over like several hundred years, that it would be a pretty continuous increase over time. I mean, maybe there's little spikes and valleys here and there, but if we go back to, agricultural times, right? When agricultural industries, if you were a kid, like from an early age, you're helping with your siblings, you're helping with the farm, like you've got responsibilities that the family and others are depending upon you for. We are in a knowledge economy, not in an agricultural economy anymore. And so those responsibilities don't come until much later. So it's not necessarily surprising that the age of maturity has continued to rise, because we're not giving them that responsibility in the way that we used to historically. But the neurocognitive capabilities of maturity, resilience, dealing with problems and challenges and failures and obstacles really becomes problematic if you're starting to give them authority as young people coming up in their career. So I think the response from an employer perspective is, how are you mitigating that through your training, leadership development, mentoring programs? And this doesn't have to be spending thousands or millions of dollars to train people. I'm not saying that we should become an extension of an education system in your workplace, but I do think we need to be intentional about recognizing what are the aptitudes, strengths, and skills of the people coming into our workforce. And if we have an expectation that people are going to take on responsibility, are we making sure that they have visibility around our expectations for maturity and being really clear on that? I've said it before, I'll probably say it a million times. Unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. And we don't do that. And we're all guilty of this. But if we're, Gen X or millennial, we have a set of expectations in our head of how you should behave, how you should think, and why you do certain things. But we fail to communicate those and just expect that others are going to recognize and know it through osmosis or some other process. And then we get upset when they don't do it. So pieces of this is just recognize the trend. It's happening, and it has been happening for a long time. But as an organization, our response needs to be not throw them under the bus or fire all the Gen Zs or don't hire Gen Zs. Put in place simple, low cost, low touch even programs around mentorship, guidance, small training programs that you can, or even creating cohorts of different generational groups within your organization to share best practices and talk about issues and topics like that. I think that those are things that I would be thinking about as an organization to respond to this overall trend. So that's my 2 cents on it.
No, that's fantastic.
Oh, go ahead, Valerie.
No, that's fantastic.
I'm glad you mentioned the trend, Barry, and I think, people are maturing later. And I think mostly that's a good thing. If you think about couple hundred years ago, like teenagers having kids, getting married, like, and even further back, like in some ways, like our evolution hasn't caught up with that yet. Like as a, dad of an 11-year-old, I'm keenly aware of that. But we're also living longer too. And
True.
So in some ways it makes sense. And I think whenever this conversation comes up with like, friends or colleagues or whatever, I think there's a tendency to like kind of shit on the younger generation as like, oh, they don't work hard, they don't do this. Like, not entirely true. They just have, in my opinion, different priorities. The how many of them want to be entrepreneurs is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I read this somewhere. I think it was a McKinsey study that, they are more likely to value purpose in an organization than, title, seniority, even pay. The purpose behind it is more important to them. And I think also, we are in more of an inclusive age now. And so I think they're more open to different styles of working. And I think we talked about this on a prior episode. They're more likely to embrace like having a portfolio of jobs than to, becoming a company person where they ascend through the ranks through hard grunt work for years and years. So I don't think it's all negative. It's just a different framework.
I know, it's like so easy to roll your eyes at a younger generation, and it's still like a learning curve to find a way to cohabitate in the working environment. I was just telling this story. So when I started out at 22 as an auditor at Deloitte, they would just email us the address, and then we would have to print out on MapQuest how to go and show up and then interface, rent your own car, do all these things totally on your own, interface with the CFO of that company, like you're 4 months out of school. So it's just such a different world right now, such a different world. Mm-hmm. It's like mind boggling. So you have to even just put all that out of your head and think about the world that we live in now. So the 3 things that come to mind that are we're just going to have to metabolize in our working system is one. These younger generations want to be like higher up immediately. They want these big lofty titles. They feel that's something that they deserve or are entitled to. That's one. Two, there's a complaint amongst our peers that, why would we invest in these younger folks if they're not going to stay here, because the stigma is that they don't stay at a company for very long. And then I think the positive that we really need to lean into is the two-letter elephant in the room. This generation always uses AI. So it's an opportunity to actually bridge the gap of everybody that's been there for so long and utilize this younger cohort of people to adopt and teach us how to actually really use and integrate these tools on day to day.
Yeah. I'd call that reverse mentoring in some situations, right?
Yeah.
Where the younger people are mentoring those of us that have been around a little bit longer and didn't grow up with a digital device in our hand the day we were born, practically, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what these Gen Zs are. So I think that third one's powerful. There's a lot to learn from this generation and a lot to leverage from this generation that, I think is short-sighted to just cast aside.
Yeah, I like that concept of like reverse mentoring, because I think was where my mind was going. The article talked about that they are less receptive to like position-based authority and more receptive to connections and the why behind things. And so I think if you take that framework, it just kind of sets it up for like this mentor relationship. If you're bringing in younger workers into the workforce, learn from them, but also understand what they can learn from you. And I mean, I kind of equate it to like, dealing with my daughter. We're fighting now about screen time and other things, but I try and avoid like the no more screen time because I said so. I don't want to make it me versus you. And similar, in an employment context, it's not because I said so, I'm your manager. Like, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and this is why we're going this way. And I think you can engage them on that level and also learn from them, because if you kind of explain where you're going, or explain the why, or explain the connection and their role in going where you want to go, it opens the door for them to suggest other ways to get there. And that's okay. I mean, doesn't mean you have to take their suggestions, but having them feel a sense of participation or a sense of power in, hey, this is what I think. Like, I mean, that's what you want from an employee, right? Someone who's engaged. Like, if you want someone to just sit down and like pound out work, like you probably do need to learn from a younger generation and how to do that with AI, because that's just not, there aren't that many roles out there. Like,
yeah. And I guess, maybe a contrarian perspective on your point is the burden of having to explain why, like a tax on productivity that we have to pay. Do we really need to be explaining this all the time? Like, why?
I mean, I guess it could be, but I don't know, maybe I don't have a lot of self-confidence, but my general approach to things is to like put it out there and like, this is what I'm thinking. I might be wrong. Like, tell me where I'm wrong, to kind of invite the ideas in. And yeah, maybe you don't have to explain everything, but like high level, this is where we're going. Yeah. This is how we want to get there. As opposed to just, I need you to do, 50 tasks by the end of the week.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in retaining anyone, particularly anyone you just recently hired.
Yeah.
So, if it's more effort in a distinct career path, why exactly you can't be VP tomorrow, but here you can be in a little bit if you just follow these steps, or taking more time in the mentorship program, doing all these fun things that this generation really values. That seems to have a better payoff than rehiring again, dealing with, an absent of a person being in a role, onboarding and just the whole loss of productivity and just going through that whole process over again. So I feel like that is the retention tax almost is what I would say.
Yeah. I think my response to that would actually be that it's not actually a productivity tax, but it's actually an output multiplier. So if I take the time to make sure that people understand why we're doing what we're doing, my belief is they will do that task in the best possible way to achieve the best possible outcomes. If I don't explain why, then they're going to do it to the letter of the law. I said, do this. And that's all they're going to do. A, because you treated them like shit. And B, because you just said, do it. I'm just going to do it, right? I don't understand why I'm doing it. You just told me to do A, I did A. You told me to do B, I do B. But if you explain to me, and this doesn't have to be a lengthy diatribe of explanation, but if I have an understanding of the why, if I understand the purpose of what I'm doing, then I can, as the doer, connect the dots and be thoughtful about it and say, interesting, yeah, I'll do A and B. But by the way, you know what? If I extend B into C, like, I'm making this up, but like, I can do it better. I could do it faster. I could make it easier for the next person who takes the task from me, whatever, right? So I think you actually get a productivity multiplier if you take the time to describe the how and the why versus a productivity task of like, oh, I got to tell you why. No, just shut up and do it. But this isn't the 1950s, and we're not a bunch of boomers sitting around in a command and control environment anymore. It is part of operating and functioning. And I think if you look at it as a tax, people are going to feel that. They're going to feel the burden of you having to explain it, the burden of asking for the why behind it. But if you approach this as an opportunity to say, how do I multiply the productivity by bringing you in and engaging you in the process, helping you understand what you're doing, why it's important, I believe you'll get better outcomes.
A really smart guy once told me that that's called discretionary impact.
What would that be?
Yeah. That if the employees know the reasons behind something,
yeah,
or they know what priorities are, they will come across opportunities to go above and beyond.
Yeah. Totally. You have to set the environment up for that.
I'm really jealous because when I was in my first and second year at Deloitte, which is notorious, these firms are just wheeling and dealing human beings, and you have a 2 to 3 year life cycle, right? Which is actually a lengthy period of time, but it could be longer. You could be on the manager or partner track. That being said, I would walk in on any given day during busy season, and then, our senior would say, hey, it's going to be another all-nighter. It's going to be another like midnight exit. And I'm like, how do you know? We just got here. What if we work really hard? And, like I am actually secretly jealous of this generation to be able to ask why, because I feel like you could retain more talent a lot longer in certain firms.
Maybe the Gen Zs aren't fragile, but we've just built horrible workplaces and we've normalized bad behaviors like burnout and meaningless hierarchy and transactional interactions with employees. Like maybe those really are bad things that we've allowed to happen from previous generations. And Gen Z is like, hey, this doesn't really make any sense if you stop and think about it. Like, can we be humans here and like stop just burning each other out? And there's earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to work for a large financial institution. It was a brief 11-month stint for various reasons, but not the least of which was the culture that had been curated, which was just silly. The structure of a day was you show up, you had to be there before 9 o'clock because it was an unspoken rule that everyone should be in their seats before the bosses get in. So got to be there a little before 9 o'clock because the bosses, if you were a boss, you got to show up at 9. If you weren't a boss, you had to be there before 9. We would work from 9 to 11. At 11 a.m., we would start talking about where we were going to go for lunch. We'd talk for an hour about where we would go for lunch. 12 o'clock, we would go to lunch. We would do an hour and a half lunch outside the building, right? 1:30, we're back in our seats. We work till 3:30. Then we start talking at 3:30 for 30 minutes about where we're going to go to coffee at 4 o'clock. And then at 4 o'clock, we get up and walk out of the building and go basically for an hour to go somewhere, get coffee, and then come back. Now it's 5 o'clock. Now I work for maybe another hour or two to 6 or 7 o'clock. And because I'm getting later in the day, we start talking about where we're going to order in dinner. Because if we work late enough, you get dinner ordered in. So let's structure that. So, now I do a little more work. Dinner comes in, we're all talking and eating dinner at our desk. And if we push things a little bit further, maybe I work another half an hour after I finish my food, we get a car service home because I've worked so late. So now I'm there from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., right? I'm there 12 hours and I probably did 5 hours of work. And so I at this point, I was a young parent, so I had young kids at home. I'm like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So I hustled my butt, didn't do the 1 hour conversation about lunch. I didn't do the 90-minute lunch. I didn't do the 1 hour coffee. I got my stuff done. And I was the only person leaving that floor at 5:30 p.m. to go home. But I went home. My stuff was done. I'd been there 2 months. My boss called me into his office and said, Barry, I need you to know that the fact that you leave early every day is going to reflect poorly on your performance evaluation. I was like, are you kidding me? So I'm like, look, it is what it is. There were days I worked till 9:00 because there was a lot of stuff to get done, had to be happen. And we did. I did it. I'd stay late. I'd get it done. If I didn't need to, I left at 5:30 and I kept doing that. Well, I ended up getting a bonus. I ended up getting bumped up a title, but like the environment didn't change. Like this just isn't the great place for me. So I resign. I go back to my former employer. My boss is like, you can't leave. You're the most productive person here. No one else gets as much done in this shorter period of time as you do. So, but there was, on the individual basis, they recognized it, but the culture was like, what is this? So, maybe part of this isn't just, the Gen Zs are, being entitled and asking for things. Maybe the rest of us have built such horrible workplace environments that they're actually right. And we need to make some changes. I don't
I'm
know.
jealous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to the culture of the workplace, I've been rewatching Mad Men and just the kind of stuff that they would say, like you talking about like mental health days and things like that. Like, I'm cool with that. I think that's a real thing, but, in Mad Men, they'll say things like, oh, just, leave your personal life at the door and here's what you do. Like, I mean, nobody can do that. Like, we're people, like shit going on at home is going to affect how you show up at work. Like, how can you show up and be productive? I mean, it's like what do they call it? The Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, if I am not secure in, food, childcare, whatever, how am I going to be productive and achieve at work? I mean, I think that's a complete fiction to think that, you can just leave that stuff at the door.
Yep, totally. All right. Well, let's get to some takeaways that folks can think about. I've got a couple I'll jump on, and then if you guys want to add anything, that'd be great. We kind of just hinted briefly here today on this, like, we didn't use the word, but the term gig economy, right? These people aren't growing up thinking, I'm going to work for this one company for 20 years. I'm going to do a bunch of different things. And if they're entrepreneurially minded, they want to do a bunch of different things. So how can we leverage that gig mentality within the workplace? How do I give them rotational opportunities in ways that I haven't done to give them exposure? And by the way, that helps explain the why, because if I'm seeing how other things are done in other functions, I'm learning more about the bigger picture. I can see how pieces fit together. I understand the why of what we're doing. So I think that's one. I think the reverse mentoring, like, how do we leverage the talent of these Gen Z folks coming in the workplace from a technology first point of view to just, kind of the digital world that we now live in? How do we leverage that talent in new ways? And I think the third one is, how do we really get maybe comfortable with the discomfort of their questioning the way things are done and really listen? Like, just take a minute and actually listen. Shut your ego off, shut your pride up, and listen for their point of view. And I think you can learn a lot about opportunities to change and improve your workplace environment. And then the final thing, which maybe ties in with the first reverse mentoring, just goes back to the age of maturity and the age of authority, that we have to recognize that reality is there and take steps to be intentional about building processes in to bring people up that maturity curve through clear expectations, clear mentoring, clear goals and expectations around the roles that they need to perform. So I think those are some things I would think about for folks that are wondering how to manage and motivate Gen Z in their workforce. Valerie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would say the biggest takeaway is humor the questions, put energy into retention, because I think it really is just the effort of retention tax. And I think there's a lot of upside in continuity, keeping what I call an AI bridge, keeping this young cohort of folks around to help bridge the AI gap with all of us trying to learn and keep up. And then for sure, the metric side of things in numbers. I mean, it's just a lot of savings in having to go through this process over again and having to rehire, look for people on board, and the productivity.
Great points. Marcus, any closing thoughts for you?
Yeah, a couple. One, I think Gen Z, not responding the same way to positional authority, that's going to put more importance on your managers, middle managers, supervisors, to have a connection with them and to, invite them into that dual mentor type relationship. And where do your managers learn to do that? I mean, they're going to learn it from the directors, from the executive team, from the founder. So it's really, executives, founders, CEOs, I think need to be really intentional about kind of modeling the behavior that they want to see. And also, like you said, kind of put the ego away, but being open to change and being open to rethinking how they do things. Not at a fundamental level. Like, you don't have to change your business philosophy because you want to attract Gen Z workers. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that their good ideas can come from anywhere. And so if you have metrics or, job descriptions or titles or things that aren't making sense or, aren't driving with your younger workforce, or if there are ideas that they put forward that challenge those things, I mean, be open to thinking about that and rethink, like, what actually do you need from this position? What's a requirement? And, maybe there are different things you need to measure. So, I think learning from each other and resist the eye rolling.
Love it. Awesome. All right. We'd appreciate a like and a subscribe below if you haven't already. And we'll look forward to seeing you on our next episode at the Praxis Project.